So welcome everyone. Welcome to the weekly Dharma gathering. My name is Christina Lopez and I'm excited to be here today and gather together. Tonight's session will be led by Lama Justin and it's titled Making Room for the Wrathful Mother. Lama Justin will lead us through a guided meditation, Dharma talk, and we'll close with a Q&A discussion. And tonight's session will be recorded, so if you prefer to not be seen, please take off your camera feature. And please note that you will also be recorded when asking a question. Also, if you have a question during the guided instruction or talk before the Q&A, please feel free to enter it into the chat box at any time, and we will be able to discuss it during our Q&A period. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo weekly Dharma gathering account, and you'll receive an email notification once it's posted. And so welcome Lama Justin. Lama Justin is an American Vajrayana Buddhist teacher, writer, and is a co-founder of Bhumi's Parsha, an experimental Buddhist Sangha along with Lama Rod Owens. He is the author of Modern Tantric Buddhism, Authenticity and Embodiment in Dharma Practice, published by North Atlantic Books, and a contributor to Buddhism and Whiteness, Critical Reflections, published by Lexington Books. Lama Justin serves as the Executive Director of Chaplaincy and Staff Wellness for the New York City Department of Correction, where he also serves as staff chaplain and has experience as a hospice and hospital chaplain as well. He was ordained as a Repa, a lay tantric yogin in the tradition of Milarepa by His Eminence Gyaltsab Rinpoche. Lama Justin has presented on Buddhist practice at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, University of Chicago, Wellesley, Columbia, and has led retreats at a variety of Dharma centers. Lama Justin is passionate about helping to create the conditions for authentic, embodied Tantric Buddhist spiritual practice in the West. Thank you for joining us today, Lama Justin, and I will hand off the reins to you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for. I'd like to just thank you and everyone here for having me here today. I'd like to start off with a meditation that's going to be a guided meditation rooted somewhat loosely on a form of Palden Lama practice that comes from the Karma Kagyu tradition. This form of Palden Lama is known as Dosoma, and this particular practice was one of the protector practices of great yogi Naropa. And it can be found in the Dharma collection known as the Kagyu Natso, which was a collection of all of the tantras and the sadhanas and associated commentaries of the practices that Marpa brought from India to Tibet during his lifetime in the 10th century. So if everyone could just get as comfortable as possible, and that can be however you like it with your body. You can be laying down, you can be sitting down, you can have your screen on or off, whatever feels comfortable. And take a couple deep breaths. And during this visualization, we're going to meet Sri Devi Palden Lama Dosoma. She's also known as the Lady of Smoke. And so imagine yourself seated in the midst of a charnel ground, a place of intense impermanence, a place where your own impermanence and the fleetingness of life is constantly pointed out and reminded. Imagine that this charnel ground is surrounded by a wall of grayish brown, cool mist. And take time to allow yourself to let this be as real and immediate as possible. And then imagine that you're all of a sudden able to sense the presence of Sri Devi Lama in the form of Dulsuma, Lady of Smoke. She's black in color and emaciated. She has one face and 4 arms and 2 legs. Her first right upper hand holds a sword above her head, and the second lower right hand holds a skull cup full of blood. Her left upper hand holds a spear that also has an axe head, and the second lower hand holds aloft a trident with a silk scarf that's fluttering in the wind. Her teeth are gnashing, and as you look closely, you notice that between her clenched fangs is a stiff, small human corpse. And her matted orange hair flows upwards like flames. And she wears a garland of snakes and skulls. In her right ear is an earring that's a ringlet. It's serpentine, it's a snake. And in her left is a lion. She's adorned by a crown of flowers and black silk ribbons that move in the wind in this charnel ground where you find yourself. And she wears a necklace of severed asura heads. These ghostly spirits. Tied above the upper part of her body is an elephant skin. And tied around her lower portion is a bull hide, which is held with a belt that's made of the king of the Nagas, or serpentine energies. She rides on a powerful donkey with a white spot on its forehead, which moves erratically as if it's possessed. And her 2 legs are shackled together because of her intensity. And she stands before you with great intensity, riding this possessed donkey. And as the donkey moves about, you notice that she's shouting wrathfully in the middle of the charnel ground in which you experience her. Try and take a moment to directly experience her intense, awesome nature, her sheer power, power that's difficult to contain. And notice that she's surrounded by 100,000 mamos, of witch-like female spiritual beings, and dakinis and flesh eaters. And she arises to be here with you in this moment. She arises from a place in the northeast of Mount Meru, from within a glacial lake 500 meters in depth, in which there's a palace made of skulls in the form of a fortress, and this is her abode. This is the abode of the terrifying Sri Devi Lama Dasoma. And allow yourself to acknowledge that as she approaches this place, she approaches out of intense love for you. And that while she screams and she howls and she shouts, and as she moves the weapons that she holds in the skull cup of blood, she does so to eradicate all obstacles to your spiritual practice, all ways in which you get in your own way, all of the ways that we can be filled with softness and rot, all of the ways that our pride and our haughtiness gets in the way of clear, direct apprehension of the nature of mind. And perhaps you can sense that in a former life as a bodhisattva, in the presence of Lord Buddha under the Bodhi tree, that Sri Devi Lama Dasoma vowed to protect the Buddha's teachings and to lead all practitioners such as yourself to a state of complete bliss. Listen as she approaches. Breathe deeply as you sense her cool and terrifying presence. As you hear her mantra, Om Hum Shriya Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shriya Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shriya Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. And imagine that swirling around her like a display of billowing locusts is a retinue of hundreds of thousands of black females who are naked with matted hair. In their right hands, they hold human hearts, and in the left, they hold asuras, God sprites by the hair. And the heart centers of these black, terrifying entourage members are marked by a syllable Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. And imagine that the Lady of Smoke reveals herself directly to you in this moment. And in this private moment, allow yourself to Ask her for the support that you need right now. Om Om Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Om Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. And allow this request to be for whatever it is that you need in this moment, whether it be strength or wisdom, whether it be softness, the ability to listen, whether it be the need to put down obsession with formal dharma, to experience the absolute in every moment, whether it be the ability to shed the intellect like a snake sheds its skin. Om Om Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali. Or whether it be healing. Om Om Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali. Om Om Shri Devi Kali Kali. Allow yourself to come into direct relationship and imagine that Sri Devi Padam Lama Lasuma comes close and you meet face to face, eye to eye. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. That Padam Lama, the unconquerable lady of the three worlds, blesses you to accomplish all of the wishes, all of your activity, to help seal the intent around your practice with ultimate reality. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. And that by the sheer direct presence that she creates in front of you, that you experience wisdom and nature of mind in post-meditative states. And that just as she can instantly circumambulate the three realms, as she, the joyful embracer of Mahashvara, she who is worshipped by Indra, by the Asura king, by the Brahmin king, and by the king of the netherworld, the four great kings, is here for you. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. Om Hum Shri Devi Kali Kali Mahakali Hum Byo. And imagine in this moment, she smiles as her wild, possessed donkey runs and neighs, snorting. And as she swings her weapons and screams and yells, her emaciated body, the corpse in her mouth, her three eyes meet your two eyes. And imagine that a white light emanates from her brow, directly shining a white light to your brow, blessing you with the constancy of the blessing of her body. And imagine that a red light from her throat center emerges, touching your throat center, blessing you with the clarity of her howling, screaming Dharma voice. shattering glass, and awakening corpses. And then imagine that a blue light, lapis lazuli in color, emerges from her heart and deeply penetrates your heart center, blessing you with the enlightened mind, the ferocity of the suddenness of the realization of Mahamudra. And then imagine that the entire form of Sri Devi Padma Lama Soma, as well as her donkey, that dissolves into rainbow light, and that rainbow light transforms into a ball of light right above the crown of your head. Imagine that this light descends down through your central channel, past the level of your brow, and then down past the level of your throat, lower still, level of your heart center, and then lower still to the level of your navel until it settles 4 finger widths below your navel. And imagine that this rainbow tigle generates light and rainbow beams that fill your entire body, blessing your body with freedom from illness, blessing your emotional body with freedom from preoccupation with yourself, so that you can directly behold others for who they are. Blessing all of your organs and your veins, so that your body can experience deep rest. And then imagine that not only the light, but your entire sense of self dissolves into space. Leaving you free and open and able to rest into the experience of mind as it is. And then slowly bring your awareness to your body, to this virtual gathering, this kind of chakra that's happening in this moment. And privately check in to notice the blessings of Sri Devi Padma Lama Soma. Okay. So, um, So this practice, obviously I didn't share the whole practice. It's kind of considered a bit of a secret dharma, and I'm happy to teach it in the future to people who are interested. But I'm sharing this now because in times like these, connecting to the Wrathful Mother is something that keeps me going. It keeps me able to be resilient and to find power in all of the places where I work. So I work on Rikers Island, um, which is a place of intense experience, intense suffering for pretty much everybody who um, finds themselves there, whether they're people in custody or whether they're staff. It's a place of violence. It's a place that's also deeply denigrated by our culture, even though we come from a very violent culture. And it's an island which is separated from the rest of New York City, and so in that way it's a little bit of a kind of appendage that lives in mystery and is scary. It's hard to understand. And since the COVID crisis or pandemic, I had contracted COVID in April in responding to DSC staff who were sick with it and who had died. Immediately after that, I was asked to do the difficult work of blessing all of the bodies that are buried in the city's Potter's Field, or at that time, primarily people who died from the COVID crisis. And so on a weekly basis, I go to Hard Island a couple of times a week, and there's a truck that comes with all the bodies from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, and at the request of City Hall, I was asked to do that very tough work. And last week, I don't know the exact number right now, but I know I crossed the threshold of 800 bodies that I've blessed since the beginning of May. And I've come to love Hard Island, which is where the Potter's Field is, and it's a modern charnel ground. It's a place where I guess there are anywhere between 800,000 to 1 million people who have been buried there since the 1860s. And this is a place where I'm able to practice Palden Lama, for the people who have died, try and sense the presence of Palden Lama while I'm there. And I also do other protective practices. And the reason I feel like in these times, for the politics of the day, with everything going on, with the presidential election, with all the racial violence that's happening, with the fallout, the economic fallout from COVID, from the way our lives have been impacted, where we've just gotten used to just kind of staying at home and doing things by Zoom and being indoors. We're all going through a lot. And the thing about the Wrathful Mother is she arises directly to meet us where we are right now. And that sometimes isn't pleasant. Right before COVID kind of became a big thing here, I was in India late February into early March, and I was making a pilgrimage of kind of Hindu tantric and Buddhist tantric kind of crossover sites in West Bengal and in Jharkhand. And there was a site I went to in northern West Bengal, which is the home to a Kali temple. Kali is another kind of like Hindu Wrathful mother, which is probably kind of like the progenitor for Palden Lama. And the form of the statue in the temple was ferocious, large, black, sort of lolling tongue, the garland of skulls. It was so powerful. And then, went on to other pilgrimage sites. But when I was sick with COVID, for 5 straight nights, I hallucinated her form all through the night. And it was terrifying. It was, and it was real. Like, that's all I saw. All I saw was the skeletal form of Palden Lama slash form of Kali known as Kankaleshwari Kali. And a friend of mine, was actually a couple friends. There's a friend who was a shaman and then Lama Rad were texting me and make sure I was okay, like frequently. And both of them were like, oh, I have this sense that you're being very well protected. And it was her. And within the context of Dharma, I've never been one to, I don't connect with peaceful deities, and I used to feel very strange. Everybody would say like, oh, I want to do Chinrezi, I want to practice like White Tara, things like that. And, that's fine. And I've done that, I practice those practices and they're great, but I've never felt like this visceral connection until back in 2012 when I received the empowerment, like the initiation for this practice and the transmission for it, that I felt like I had just met my match. I met my spiritual, match. And I think that we could all use a little bit more of this intensity in our lives right now, especially the directness of showing up. So everything feels impossible right now. Like tomorrow morning, I need to go to Heart Island and bless bodies that come in. And when I'm there, I can read the names, that are written on the like plain pine boxes. I can see the date of death. And the truck can only hold at most 24 bodies. And so it's 24 stories, 24 lives, 24 points that when you look, like, in terms of the genetics of how we all came to be here, it just fans out, right? It touches so many lives that have existed. So many beings in the past are connected to these 24 people. And then, of course, I become connected to these 24 people by just being there, blessing their bodies, doing practice, witnessing their burial, praying for the land so that it remains sacred land. And when I consider the magnitude of that, it's impossible. And these wrathful mothers, whether it's Palden Lama or whether it's trauma, or what Choma Nagmo shows up in the form of Vajravarahi, except she's black. Vajravarahi is, somewhat wrathful. These beings cut through everything so that we can have direct experience of the moment, direct experience of the impossibility of this pandemic kind of tearing through the bodies of all of these people on the planet, all of the people who have died. And I don't know how many people, I don't know if this is actually just like a New York City group, but we've had 23,000 people die. Well, more now, probably about 24,000 die as a result of COVID since, early, since late March. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of stories. It's a lot of pain. And ultimately, these wrathful mothers, just like Paul and Lama, Soma, represent nothing more than our awareness, our ability to cut through everything that gets in the way, cut through our conceptual mind, our ability to cut through our sense of ordinariness and brokenness, or to cut through the fact that, for example, I'm living in Brooklyn, and so in Brooklyn, I can arise in direct relationship to Sri Devi Padan Lama, or to the Suma, or to any other form of Padan Lama, or trauma, or Vajravarahi, and I'm communing directly with the source of all Dharma. That the ordinariness, the far-awayness goes away. This need to aspire for something far away, or to connect. Oh, I need to go to, Mother India, to go experience these things and bring back my experiences. That's not really necessary, with these mothers. When they show up, Brooklyn is the center of the universe. Manhattan is the center of the universe. Queens is the center of the universe. The South Bronx is the center of the universe. However we arise in this moment, in this form, male, female, non-binary, whatever our appearance is, wherever we are in the country, wherever we are on the planet, is connected to direct experience of things as it is. And the benefit of the wrathfulness is the benefit of how sudden this experience can be. And that has a lot to do with how we relate to time. And so I don't know about you all, and I actually don't know anything about anyone's experience with Buddhism here. Some I do know, but one thing that we experience and learn about is how long the path is, right? In the Theravadan tradition, it takes aeons to be able to achieve enlightenment. In the Mahayana tradition, it becomes shorter. In the Vajrayana tradition, it becomes even shorter. And then there are some practices that are very fast. And the thing about this quickness is that it is a tremendous blessing to be able to recognize, mind quickly. And yet it's intensely frightening to be able to have things uprooted, all of our attachments, right, to face all of the things that we want to push away. To sit and witness some of the ugliness of what it means to be human and how we act from places of blindness or privilege, how we fail to recognize the suffering of others. Not in this form, but in another form, Padan Lama holds up a mirror, and that mirror is a direct reflection of two things. One, on the very kind of essential nature, the mirror represents directly showing us the nature of mind. But on a much more kind of, personal level, she's showing us all of our bullshit. Use a slightly shocking term, like, all of the ways where we get hung up, all of the ways where we try and be overly good. Um, all of the ways that we try and be peaceful and equanimous when on the inside we're kind of gnashing our teeth, right? Or we're angry. And the thing that, I notice everywhere is that we're all struggling with some kind of form of anger right now. It could be the anger at the politics of the day. It could be the anger around how COVID is being, managed or mismanaged. It could be anger around the city's response. It could be anger around how we may have lost loved ones, or how we may have gotten sick, and and may not be the same. Like there are people who have gotten sick and are still not back to normal. Sri Devi Padma Lama and other texts, other practices, and other forms holds a leather bag of disease, and she is propitiated in times of pandemic. And so you find this in certain Mahakala texts, another the male Dharma protector that Sri Devi Padma Lama is invoked in times of both plague, but also famine. And in a way, when we look at everything that's going on in the world, everything that's going on in the United States with the fires in the West Coast, fires in our heart, the sense of isolation and powerlessness, there's a lot of emotion there. And the mother allows us to be able to directly experience that emotion and to touch it and to be able to see that actually, this thing that's bubbling up within me, which is really intense, is not something to be discarded. This might look ugly and it might feel like something dangerous because it's so visceral, but this is actually the power that will help liberate us. And it's funny because I don't know how all this sounds, but like, my Dharma path is not typical, I think, in the sense that, prior to working in corrections, I worked in home hospice. And so there I was surrounded by death. And so I went from surrounded by death to surrounded by violence, which is kind of just like what we find in the sadhana. And then, surrounded, of course, by mass death with the Heart Island stuff. And there were times where, I would find myself struggling with trying to be more light. Oh, let me like, be, a sunny Dharma person. But that's just not me. I'm, and it's not because I'm depressive or I, look on the dark side of everything. It's just where this life has brought me. And again, I become concerned sometimes that the Dharma world is myopic, focusing only on, this positive, peaceful thing, when the world around us is completely out of control. When leaders surround themselves with, minions that are just yes people, when the world is literally on fire. I wonder sometimes about being peaceful all the time. When people of color are being killed all the time, and the rage connected to that is just dismissed. I wonder about showing up the next day peaceful. And it's not to say open your heart and let destruction out. But when we look at the source of some of these traditions, like in you know, the kind of early nexus of Buddhist Tantra and Hindu Tantra, we find that these practices are just very visceral. They're in your face. And I think that we could use a little bit more in your face. The one thing I know very well is in your face, whether it's, you know, walking through jails or walking through, you know, potter's fields. And I think the in your face is just where it's at. You know, it's the place to be. So anyway, and I want to leave room for questions and answers, but I'll just leave you with this. You know, and what is the use of cultivating a gilded lily kind of Dharma experience when inside of us is so much intensity that doesn't match that? And then rather than be slow, why not arise fast? Yeah. So anyway, that's my little talk. You know, and I actually prefer to kind of have more one-on-one stuff, because otherwise I feel like I sound like some kind of politician running for mayor. So does anyone have any questions or want to say something or yell at me or?
Thank you, Lama Justin. I am so fired up by your
Yay.
So much of what you shared resonated with me. And I would say I'm pretty new to like studying Buddhism and trying to find my way. And yeah, I feel like I've come across these things. I always say I like the wrathful side of things. And even when I shared tonight's talk on my social channels, like someone I know was like, oh, that doesn't sound nice at all. And I was like, well, that's what I like. So I was kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about maybe like, I don't know if it would be the difference or the travel from Mahayana to Vajrayana, and share anything about like how different teachers approach it. So I know for some folks, they consider some things super secret, and then other folks share things more openly. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, this Dharma, like I'll say one thing about this practice. When the empowerment was given by my teacher, Gyaltsen Rinpoche, it was to, you know, a large group, and he said that, you know, back in the day, this used to be only conferred one-on-one, and then somewhat more recently, like within the past couple hundred years, then whenever there were like tulkus or reincarnated teachers who were present receiving the empowerments, it would only be given to them. And so that he said, you know, look, I'm going to give it to everybody here. And this is a kind of practice that, you know, I've been given permission to transmit, and, you know, can transmit the whole thing properly, you know, under the right circumstances. In this particular case, though, I wanted to kind of give people a taste, you know, so they're like selections of the visualization, kind of like the best of, you know, and so, you know, different teachers have different kind of opinions about this. I tend to view some of this stuff as being what's known as self-secret, which is, you know, really that, you know, you can go to like Barnes and Noble, for example, right, and find a book on highest yoga tantra stuff, and these might be practices that have been kept secret for centuries, and only taught under very kind of tight circumstances. And most people will read these things and not really have any idea as to what they mean, and what the practice of them means. That's not necessarily to say that all things should be just available on Barnes and Noble. And actually, I spent a lot of time thinking about this and wrote a little bit about it in Modern Tantric Buddhism, where I feel like Tantric Buddhism doesn't really deserve a place at Barnes and Noble. It's complex. Tantric practices are very powerful, but I think that the place where people really mess up a lot is in relationship to non-dual experiences, where they might have an experience or be practicing something that emphasizes non-duality, which will cause people to say, well, I'm above ethics, right? I'm above good and bad, and just do whatever they want. And also the other thing that I've kind of noticed, just from kind of, having a Facebook account, is that many of these people tend to be white men. And that's kind of concerning as well, how, white men will kind of use some of the benefits, quote unquote, of approaching non-duality to be able to make use of the finances of others. Oh, give me donations, or the bodies of others. Oh, I'm practicing consort practice. Well, please be my consort, or offerings involving, substances like alcohol, like, as a justification for alcoholism. And of course, this is not just something that white men do, but it is, kind of an interesting thing. These practices were considered secret in Tibet, and they were considered secret in India. And then there are also problems with keeping things very secret too. There's this cliquishness that needs to be kind of examined. The Mahayana tradition is much more broad in its approach and its ethics. I mean, from a perspective of ethics, occupies a place that's very admirable, right? To work towards the liberation of all sentient beings, which is, when we really look at that, I mean, we can say that, oh, may, and I'll say this later, may any benefit from this session be dedicated towards the liberation of all sentient beings. But what does that mean? What does that mean in Kenosha? What does that mean here in New York City? What does that mean, what does that mean for people of color? What does that mean as a white person, in this age where we have our eyes open to whiteness and systemic racism? Like, what does it mean to really say, may I benefit all sentient beings? But so typically, the Mahayana tradition is a little bit, I would say, a little bit more even keeled in a good way, stable, and rooted in this kind of Dharma practice for the broad purpose of benefiting all sentient beings. And of course, in the Vajrayana tradition, that motivation to benefit all sentient beings is obviously there as well, but the means are different, right? So there will be more of a emphasis on working with strong emotions like desire or aversion. The invocation of kind of wrathful energies, or an emphasis on very fast, like direct perception practices like Mahamudra or Dzogchen, which are beautiful practices and powerful. And and yet for people who don't have proper grounding, might not always be the most appropriate. So for me, I mean, I know Shantae well, which is why, I'm here. And I know some of the people, participating, so I felt like I could take some risk. But if I was like, at a book signing in Barnes and Noble, I might do something different.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat from David. Thank you, Lama Justice. Could you speak a bit to that relationship between terror, i.e. your experience for 5 nights with Kali, Paulden, Lama in bed with COVID, and protection? David, if you want to jump in, sorry to go through.
Yeah, thank you, Lama Justin. And I can expand on that, but maybe I just want to sneak it in the chat. So
sure. Yeah, no, expand.
No, I just that it's a provocative notion. It has been in my practice as well. It's like coming up right into that zone of sort of terror, and like it was visceral in the practice that you led, but then also when you told that particular story, right? And being on pilgrimage and kind of being like making that relationship there, and being, I kind of like imagine you being in that temple and sort of feeling that and creating that connection, and then coming home, and it was like, and I've heard other stories of people with COVID who've had similar experiences there. It connecting them to something global and universal. But yeah, just really intrigued by that notion of when you're most terrified, maybe you're most protected, and what that might mean for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So, in that experience, like I have, so it was terrifying. Like, the symptoms of COVID aside, like the pain, right? Intense body pain. Literally all I saw. I mean, it's like the weirdest thing. This form of Kankaleshwar Kali is just, other people who don't feel love towards her would say she looks horrendous. That's all I saw. After the 5th night, I actually became concerned that I was going to die, because there are like in the tradition, there's some instructions on how to kind of gauge as to whether or not you're dying, and that's a helpful thing to kind of have instruction on, if you are trained in POA and things like that. But the first night I was like, wow, this is incredible. Second night I was like, this is really intense. And it moved from intensity into, at one point, all I knew I could do was to imagine, just lay there in bed, because I basically had no energy, and visualize that image that all I saw was just kind of ravaging all of the illness in my body, ravaging all of the, that which had to be purified. There is a form of Kali that you'll see, like if you can like look up Google images of her, where she's running in a charnel ground, running in a battlefield rather. So it's like her, and there's like an army of Kalis before her, and there are just slaughtered bodies all over the place, and it's just this like, bam, like, thing of death just everywhere. And interestingly enough, like prior to going to that temple, I was in this this other temple, about a day's drive away, for 3 days, for a form of Vajrayogini who severs her head. And on the last day that I was there, I was there with Lama, and we were like, okay, let's do like the traditional offerings, right? So there are baskets of flowers and coconuts and, you know, all this stuff. And it happened to be a day where they were sacrificing goats to her. And I, you know, we're in the process of kind of, you know, going to these different locations in the temple to offer these things. And then I just heard this like terrible shrieking. And I'd never heard like, you know, a goat having its head cut off. But that's what was happening. And then I turned around and you could see the bodies just being thrown against a wall and blood gushing and the legs still kind of moving. And I was just like instantly transported into this experience of like direct experience of everything going on. And the intensity was just like, it was just like unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And I've been, let's just say in terms of overwhelming experience, like, you know, professionally, like I've had my share. This was just extraordinary. And so that, it was like an electrical energy for these 5 nights where I felt like there was purification. And then after that, you know, kind of wore off, like the closeness was there, you know? And so the way I think about this is that obviously there's been a connection with this practice and with others my entire life. And coming to a place where these practices are solely done, you know, that energy kind of gets kind of transferred into the space, creating sacred space, right? And so touching these spaces, at that severed-headed Vajrayogini temple, one of the priests was saying, oh, like this place has been here for like 5,000 years. Like, you know, one day she just arose from this in this very eerie spot as well. Like, and then the Kankaleshwari Kali temple too, just like it felt like a dream, kind of the whole like experience. So all of it's to say that, you know, within the context of Dharma practice, like sometimes it's too neat. Like we approach it from a perspective that's too neat. Oh, you know, I'm running this meditation and I'm going to sit down and do it. But we forget that like our experience, right? We're here right now, 2020, right? September 2020. And yet our whole experience goes back an infinite amount of time, right? Everything that we've connected to in the past is still there in different kinds of combinations. And sometimes we'll move through time and we'll move through space and we kind of hit these pockets where there's a tremendous amount of connection from the past, or an expression of, you know, maybe you could say natural connection in this life. And the whole thing just kind of pops. You know, in the Hindu tradition, they talk about darshan, this kind of like direct experience. And I'm really fascinated by this within the context of Vajrayana, and then also kind of this more like pure, sudden realization experiences that we find in other Buddhist traditions, where we can have a direct experience with the deity. I just never thought it would happen with, you know, like you always read like, you know, oh, and then they saw Avalokiteshvara's face, like face to face, or then Aryatara, you know, manifested herself in all of her beauty and the jewels and the silks. Mine was just like a skeletal face that was sunken in eyes and a lolling tongue and a crown of skulls. But you know, it's like in some kind of, you know, way, don't mean to belittle the experience, but it's like finding your true love, you know, where it's like, oh, like this is the one. Like I don't have any doubt now. I think pure, like you don't want a protector who is clinical. You know, it's not like you don't want your protector to be your acupuncturist. You want your protector to be your butcher. You know, your protector can also be a very close presence, though, and a loving presence. And I think that's also part of it too, is learning to find the ability to love this intensity, you know. And what's fascinating to me, like, you know, I'm really kind of impressed with a lot of my students who will express a tremendous concern about spiritual bypassing, and want to be careful that, you know, I hope I'm not spiritual bypassing. And I'm, you know, really grateful that people are so attuned to that. And yet, sometimes I think that we spiritually bypass by saying, "Oh man, I'm not going to go to that talk. That that looks unpleasant." You know, I try to not spiritual bypass by going to places that really are uncomfortable all the time. I mean, I will definitely say that my experience working for New York City Department of Correction is unpleasant most of the time. And the violence is intense, and keeping your eyes open to it and not being jaded by it is hard, because it's really easy to just become complacent. And so keeping ourselves open so that we can experience how raw things are is a really important part of practice. You know, when we look now at just how messed up the world is, like, it's easy to say, all right, well, I'm going to sit down and do like Chinrezi and everything's, I'm going to pray that everything works out. You know, while California, like, you know, there's a fire the size of, is it Delaware, they say, in California? I mean, it's a fire that big, you know? Or when, you know, people are rioting in the streets and people don't care, you know, or when, you know, people are like, oh, COVID will just go away on its own accord, you know. So, you know, meeting intensity with intensity is kind of the core of tantric practice. You know, they say that, you know, like, there are quotes from the Hivajra Tantra that the best way to get water out of the ear is to put more water in your ear. And then, you know, kind of tip your head and it kind of all comes out. The best way to be able to work with difficult emotion is to be able to find comfort and home in difficult emotion. And that ends up being kind of like a form of alchemy.
Thank you so much, Mama Justin.
Yeah.
Have room for one tiny question. If anyone was holding on to a question, now's your chance. Yes, Jennifer.
Hi.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to toss in at the end, I'm a trauma therapist. I actually just finished work for the day, and this is a remarkable way to finish it. I'm always working with people who have been traumatized and they want to feel better. And of course, but then I'm the little voice that says, why should you feel better? You know, you're expressing, you're an outcome of a whole lot of things that have shaped this suffering, and everybody wants you to be quiet and feel better. And there's just such need for room for wrath that's not hateful. Mm-hmm. And the visualization that you took us through was, you know, my heart center is a little blocked these days, and I looking for more practices and a little separated from my Sangha. And so it was very interesting because you said the word love at one point, that she was there with love. And I felt that so much more easily than, you know, in a Tara practice right now, or, you know, I'm looking into Cha, and there's just something to be said for meeting this stuff, you know, clients who don't want to feel angry. And I'm like, But wait a minute, what you just told me, it has to produce that. That's your wisdom, and it's an interesting, it's a powerful, needed thing to be able to work with sadness, anger, fear, and all of its presentations. And I just really appreciate that I dropped in here and heard you teach on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I can say this kind of like in a roundabout way. When I first started working for Department of Correction, people kept saying, oh man, like I was actually a little afraid of becoming kind of a like complicit with all of this like system of violence and stuff, and as if I wasn't to begin with, right? Like we're all kind of like enmeshed in this somehow. But what became really clear to me, people were like, oh, they should close the place down. And, sure, like, whether they close it or not, the one thing I am certain of is that closing a place like Rikers or any intense place is not the answer if you don't do all of the other work. And the other work is a culture and a society taking responsibility for itself and being able to be witness to itself and to understand itself in relationship to the way it harms and creates benefit, how it embodies wisdom and it embodies chaos. And we're not there yet. We're not there as a city. We're not there as a state. We're not there as a country. I know like a lot of people have kind of, difficult relationships with people like Trungpa Rinpoche. And yet, he said a lot of great things. And one of them was that, his impression of the United States was that, in the US, people are obsessed with speed and aggression. And we are. And we see that, or I see that, by looking at the news. I see that by the way we relate to one another in social media. I see that by how quickly we forget the speediness. We forget about the suffering, the great suffering that happened the day before. And practices like this, Palden Lama's mule is fast. Her activity, like the way she moves her arms, is fast. Her eyes dart around quickly. But so does our awareness arises quickly, right? Like that. Like we're able to recognize things like this and like that. And the aggression, there's a lot of work we need to do if we prefer one over the other. We all want to heal. And as you point out, like healing is more the process of experiencing greater equanimity in relationship to what we're experiencing, rather than putting away something that might be an unpleasant experience. And as Dharma practitioners, that's what Palden Lama represents, is finding the home in this chaos, finding the home in the intensity of the way like our kleshas arise, finding a home in how quickly our judgments arise. Like imagine, like, I mean, I don't ride the subway anymore because I have like a work car and stuff, but anywhere you enter into a space where there are lots of people, I mean, just take a moment to recognize how quickly you enter into judgment or not. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, that person sucks, like really intense like that. But it's like that person, it's almost instantaneous. We are constantly reacting. Paul Lama's weapons cut that. You know, the corpse in her mouth, right, is our own reactivity, freshly murdered. You know, like just like unable to move. Right? All of the snakes she wears represent the purified energies in our bodies. Right? So she's really this mandala of complete peace in the middle of chaos. And if there's one thing I know, is that now is a time of complete chaos. And I don't see it getting any more peaceful anytime soon. So this is why, you know, the Wrathful Mother, whether it's her form or Troma or Kali or, you know, Wrathful Mothers and other traditions are worth exploring. You know, this kind of like deep, powerful feminine wisdom that's what we need in this time. Like we don't need the structure of these other energies. So, yeah. Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Lama Justin. Thank you to everyone for joining us today and coming to gather in community. Please join us next week, and we'll have Rashid Hughes over for a talk titled Just Be Natural. And I am sending the link here in the chat, so you could check out more details there. And consider becoming a subscriber if you have not already. We have a 7-day free trial that you could find on our website. And also be sure to follow us at Weekly Dharma on Insta and Weekly Dharma Gathering on Facebook. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all. And if I can, just briefly dedicate the merit. May any benefit from this very limited talk and presentation on my part, full of errors and inadequacies, bring benefit to everybody here and anybody who may connect with it. Thank you.